My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this is it, folks. This is the third installment of CinemaSins Everything Wrong with the Hobbit series on the Battle of the Five Armies. So this is going to be, unless they go back in time and do the animated Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies at some point, this will be the last time I have to deal with CinemaSins. Let's hope they did better than Desolation of Smaug, because if you saw that video, and I'll link to it in the description, they did really terrible, and I kind of lost my cool a little bit on that, because it's fun to lose your cool on stupid stuff. So anyway, as just a reminder, CinemaSins does use bleeped out language in their videos, and some of that's going to pop up here. Also, there will be a lot of stuff I don't cover from their video, because this is the longest of the three. Their video on the Battle of the Five Armies is 20 minutes long, and if I addressed every single one of their criticisms, I'd be here for hours, and it's just I can't do it, and you don't want me to do it anyway. So I'm mainly going to pick on the ones that are really bad, and maybe pick up on a couple that are actually legit criticisms, just to prove that I'm not doing this merely to rag on CinemaSins, because they do make good points. And the fact that they make good points proves that when they make bad points, you can't really get away with it just being comedy. For which, see my previous video debunking the Desolation of Smaug video, because I showed there pretty conclusively that they just have no internal consistency about their own rules. So, at any rate, that being said, let's see what they do with the Battle of the Five Armies.
Here's Smaug, pissed off at the dwarves, taking everything out on the townspeople of Lake Town for some reason.
This came up in the previous video. He's taking everything out on the people of Lake Town because he thinks that they're in league with the people of Lake Town.
So 3 more passes and this town is done, right? Something tells me the movie will find a way to make it last longer, or even stop it.
So, this criticism is bizarre to me. First of all, 3 more passes? I mean, he scorched maybe a 10th or a 12th of that town, but 3 more passes is going to make it totally gone. I mean, like, if you're saying that the fire is going to spread so fast that the town will be totally gone, I don't think the town's going to survive even that one pass, frankly, because the way it's so rickety and barely connected, that one pass is already going to burn enough of it that it's ruined. But then he's like, I bet the movie's going to find a way to make it stop. Well, I mean, like, we all know how this story ends, right? Why are you acting like this is coming as a surprise? We know that the dragon is going to get killed. That's what happens.
After clearly devastating the town, Smaug continues his assault on the people who did him no wrong, so that Bard has a chance to find his video game weak spot.
First of all, we already covered it. He's mad at the people of Lake Town because Bilbo called himself a barrel rider. Why does this keep coming up? I don't know. More importantly, though, video game weak spot? What do you mean, video game weak spot? The Hobbit was written in the 1930s, and this weak spot was there before video games were even a dream in anybody's brain, okay? If anything, video game weak spots are based on The Hobbit, not the other way around. And I know the books don't matter, but this is based on a book which was written, I don't know, like 50 years almost before the first video game was ever created?
Meanwhile, this giant tower, which, if I were a dragon, I'd have destroyed immediately just for its pleasure to burn value, continues to go unburned.
So now we're sinning Smaug's actions because the CinemaSins guy personally finds his aesthetic preference for what to burn silly. I mean, like, this one maybe you could chalk up to comedy, but up to this point in the video, like, nothing has been particularly funny. And this one is just, like, bizarre. If it's meant to be comedy, it doesn't come across as funny. And if it's not meant to be comedy, it's a dumb critique.
It's almost like Bard is in a video game. The dragon has several powers that could end this now, but decides to give him chance after chance.
Who are you that would stand against me?
I don't know, man, but seems like you could just kill him by the time I snap my fingers. Why isn't this working?
You cannot save him from the fire. He will burn.
Burn him already!
Okay, 2 for 1 here. They're making fun of the fact that Smaug could have killed Bard by now. Yes, he could have killed Bard by now. But there's a reason why the whole villain goes on a monologue and gets himself killed trope is a thing. villains, and Smaug has proven himself to be precisely this kind of villain, tend to be arrogant. Not only arrogant, but they really, really like to rub things into their victims. Because they're bad. That's the point. Like, I know CinemaSins thinks tropes are like the worst thing in movies, and I get it. Like, sometimes tropes are overused as tropes for the simple reason that they're tropes. But tropes exist for good reasons, and in this particular instance, this one seems to fit the reason the trope exists to me.
Dragon poetically falls on the town mayor who was trying to slip off with all the gold.
Yes, poetically. Tolkien was a poet.
Also, you teased this whole big thing with Smaug at the end of the last movie, only to have him take a couple fire-breathing passes at Lake Town and then die like a chump-ass?
I kind of get where this criticism is coming from. Why did we have all this build-up in the second movie for all this stuff with Smaug, and then have Smaug in the first movie just long enough for him to do some damage and then die? Well, if you're going to break the Hobbit movie up into the Hobbit story into multiple movies, it kind of makes sense to have this be a starting point for one of them, because it is a really high-tension moment. It's the same reason why they started the Two Towers off with Frodo dreaming about Gandalf plummeting into the abyss of Khazad-dûm with the Balrog. I mean, there's a certain energy that you get going into the movie when you start with a scene like that. So it makes perfectly good sense. If you wanted to critique something, you could critique the fact that it's in 3 movies when the book doesn't really justify that. But there we're getting into issues like, why do we have a dwarf elf love story? Why do we have this massive Mount Gundabad expedition in the middle of the 3rd movie? And why do we have all this stuff with the Nazgul? And I mean, like, all that stuff could have been cut, and it would have comfortably fit into 2 movies. But they're going to complain about Smaug. Like, this actually works. It works, believe it or not. And they're getting onto it. Like, I really don't get it.
How long has Gandalf been in this cage? What if he has to pee? Has he had any food at all?
That's kind of the point of putting him in a cage. It's not comfortable. I really don't understand this one. Like, what is the sin supposed to be here? That Gandalf has somehow, managed to not... I don't even know. I really don't know. I mean, this one is just confusing on so many levels. Like, it's problematic that Gandalf is in a cage because how is he gonna use the bathroom? How's he gonna? It's like, that's the point.
I sure am glad they spent all this time on this love story. It turned this B-list dwarf into, like, only the 3rd dwarf I can remember in this movie.
Okay, so, yeah, they're ragging on the elf-dwarf love story again. And yeah, that's one of the things that really shouldn't have been in this movie. I agree with that, but you're gonna rag on it because it makes one of the 13 dwarves a memorable character? Like, I don't understand the direction of this criticism, I guess is the way that I could put it. But it just doesn't work as a criticism. We already critiqued the fact that there's an elf-dwarf love story in the 2nd movie. We don't need to do it again. It's kind of a continuing, ongoing thing. And if you were going to do it, just say the fact that it's still going on and move on from there. But to say that it makes this one dwarf, one of the 3 memorable dwarves is like... I don't get that.
How is it that random townsfolk number 1 saw Bard slay the dragon, but absolutely no one was around to see the dragon fall on the Master of Lake Town? You mean to tell me that there are several people in the background here that didn't notice an upteen-ton dragon falling on the Master?
Yeah, all those people right there under the giant falling dragon probably all died.
Will nobody think of the children?
I'm pretty sure this is a Simpsons episode.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
See, here's actually an example of CinemaSins almost getting something right, and yet totally screwing it up. Because Alfred is obviously a totally corrupt crook, and he's obviously only using the kid and think of the children as some weird way to try to get himself back in favor with the people, which he was never in favor with the people anyway. And so you could legitimately criticize this scene as even Alfred. I shouldn't even say even Alfred. Alfred is nowhere near that level of stupid. He's obviously not, because he was cunning enough to get in with the master and therefore be more or less a mini tyrant over all these people who he knows hate him. And so the scene doesn't really work, except maybe as a extreme desperation move. And so you could criticize it on a number of levels. But instead, they're going to pick on it because it apparently rings a bell with some Simpsons episode. Like, what?
They said he's been down here for days, but is conveniently rambling this exposition just as the other dwarves show up.
Well, in case you forgot, all the rest of the movie, Thorin actually is, off and on enamored of his gold hoard for days on end, leading right up to the point where he joins the Battle of Five Armies towards the end of the movie. Well, actually, that's more like the middle of the movie because they way overextend that. Anyway, point being, the fact that he's only just now saying this is probably because he's doing the same thing here that he does for the rest of the movie, which is he goes off and does something else when he has to, and then he comes back to the gold, and he's like, gold, gold. Granted, the dragon sickness may have been overplayed in this movie, and here again, you could have given a legitimate criticism, but no, CinemaSins chooses to ignore the rest of the context of the movie, which explains the very thing they criticize here. That's how they play it.
You might smell a bit of dragon. The women can clean now.
That's racist. And why are you still alive and not in prison?
Well, in case you hadn't noticed, they have no prisons, the entire town being destroyed. Also, what's racist? He said it's going to smell of dragon, but the women can clean it up. You can't even get your terms right.
What gold is in that mountain is cursed. We will take only what was promised to us.
Because that gold is not cursed.
Now here, this is another example of a legitimate criticism. Bard gets through saying that gold is cursed, and therefore we don't want it, is the implication, but we'll take what was promised to us. But it's cursed, right? So then, you could argue here that CinemaSins is still off base because the fact that it's actually owed to them may absolve the curse on that portion of the gold somehow. Seems a little weak, but yeah, I'm going to give CinemaSins this one, if only to make the point that CinemaSins is perfectly good at making legitimate comparisons with, you may not like sarcastic humor. I kind of do. And so if it wasn't for their reputation being utter garbage at this point, this would have been a criticism that I would have been amused with. But most of their videos anymore are just utter garbage. So I don't.
Inane, Len and Tauriel.
I decided to keep that from both of you until it was dramatic enough to reveal.
Or maybe he just didn't say it because it wasn't necessary to say it at that point.
Is future Sauron keeping these super powerful wizards alive for some reason?
Okay, here they show that they're just literally clueless. Radagast isn't even a captive at this point. Only Gandalf. And by the way, this exact criticism came up in the video on the Desolation of Smaug, which I trashed there, so you can go check that out.
When you see Galadriel do this, you realize what a selfish elf she's been throughout both trilogies. She had all this power to help people out, and here's the only time she uses her power ever. You know why? Because Gandalf needed her, that's why.
Or because they finally realized that this is where Sauron is hiding out, and therefore they need her level of power to contend with it, and otherwise she doesn't use that level of power because elves just generally don't use superpower whatever if they don't really have to, because that just seems to be a thing. I'm not going to get into the books because they don't matter, but you could come up with a perfectly plausible reason why Galadriel doesn't use anything like that kind of power anywhere else at any point.
Sauron introduces himself via the Lord of the Rings masturbation poem.
He is the one who wrote it.
Galadriel shows two superpowered wizards what real power looks like, completely undermining their power in the LOTR trilogy and making me wonder why she did nothing to help in that entire 3-movie war against Sauron. I mean, she totally banished that asshole right here. In the original trilogy, she was like, here's some elf trinkets, fare thee well.
Define banish. Yeah, she kind of forces him to leave Dol Guldur, but she doesn't banish him in the sense that he's gone forever. And we know perfectly well that, this ends up with Sauron in Mordor 60 years later. Less than 60 years later, because he's obviously been there for a little while by the time the Lord of the Rings gets started. So this idea that she could banish him, that's really, and even if you didn't read the books, you could figure out that this is more of a tactical retreat, because they kind of imply it in the movie.
So, you knew about the Ring of Power and knew his name was Sauron here, but Gandalf still needs to stop years later upon reaching for the ring to go and research what the f*** the ring is and shit? F*** you, Peter Jackson. You didn't even watch your own goddamn movies.
Okay, earlier they made a critique, which I skipped over because it was kind of legitimate, which is the fact that they know Sauron is here now kind of does make some of the weird stuff, some of the stuff in the beginning of the Fellowship seem a little strange, because there are people who act like that's not really going on. And there's stuff going on there that doesn't really fit. Here, though, the critique doesn't fly because Gandalf doesn't know that Bilbo's ring is the ring. And he has to go to Gondor to find out, how do I know if it's the ring? And he reads the scroll written by Isildur, and then he's like, okay, now I have a test that I can actually go and use to find out if it is the ring. They all knew from the beginning that there was a ring that Sauron made that gave him power over all the other rings. That's not the issue. The issue is Gandalf didn't know that that was the ring that Bilbo had. Duh. But now they're acting like that was just, well, he had a ring. That should have been obvious. That it was like, no. What makes you think that that was obvious from the fact that Bilbo had a magic ring? That is not obvious. That doesn't follow at all.
Her strength is failing. Take her to Lothlorien,
where she'll stay for 60 years, earning a reputation as an elf witch of terrible power, who decides not to ask any questions about Sauron ever again.
Not to ask questions about... What is that even supposed to mean? Is this like a continuation of the criticism that Galadriel does nothing for the next 60 years? Like, what is she supposed to do? She can't mount a full-on assault against Mordor. Mordor is a mountain fortress.
My people also have a claim upon the riches in that mountain.
Well, that's you, the elves, and the dwarves. Only 2 more armies to go before we have a movie that matches its title.
Why is this a sin? Seriously, why is this a sin?
begone, ere our arrows fly!
Okay, maybe this is argumentative, but isn't this a clear case where the non-Thorin dwarves could talk some sense into this guy? And remove him from power if he continues to have a treasure boner that clouds his thoughts?
Well, like we do know from the movie that they do try to talk sense into him, and it doesn't work. As for overthrowing him, clearly you're not really paying attention, because it's pretty obvious that the culture of these dwarves is not to do that sort of thing. They have a very high opinion of Thorin, and because he's their king, this is a big deal to them. They're not just going to overthrow him.
Begone!
The fuck? He's barely 30 seconds ride from the gate, but these assholes have all come up to the balcony already? God damn this movie. Jesus, absolutely nothing matters.
Because it would take them so long to climb up to the rampart from literally right below the rampart.
Why is Thorin so certain one of his fellow dwarves have taken the Arkenstone, and his paranoia hasn't focused on Bilbo, the guy who was in the treasure room longer than anyone? Yeah, he's underestimating it, but seems like a guy who is out of his mind would accuse everybody of stealing, especially a burglar. Also, if one of his fellow dwarves did take it, then what? Don't they have all the power? Why wouldn't they use it right now?
The reason he doesn't suspect Bilbo is because he thinks Bilbo is his friend, which he is. So that doesn't make sense anyway. And then, like, if one of the dwarves had it, they would have all the power. No. And granted, the way the movie sets this up is kind of dumb, because they say that in the first movie that Thror, or Thrain, whichever it was, took it as a sign of his right to rule or whatever. But it never actually says that, like, whoever holds the Arkenstone is king. That's not how it actually works.
Don't you mean Middle Earth Eaters?
I'll give him credit for a nice joke there.
This is a fight they cannot win.
That won't stop them.
Bilbo, you didn't hear that.
How do you know he didn't hear that? Hobbits actually have a pretty good sense of hearing. Also, he's not that far away. And how do you know how far away he was before he just entered that scene, given the fact that he can be invisible with a ring on?
Dragon's sickness seeps into the hearts of all who come near this mountain.
Well, really only 2 guys, but all of them sounds better.
What do you mean only 2 guys? Even Bilbo's had his moments with dragon sickness and whatnot, and the other dwarves have also had issues, not as bad as Thorin's, but there even we have like indications in the movie that his line is particularly vulnerable, so it's like, why would you say it's only 2 guys?
Dwarf reinforcements show up at dawn too, making the Lonely Mountain the same distance from everywhere an army might come from.
The same distance? Like, the elves have been camped out here for a little bit, and the men of Lake Town have been there for basically ever, because Lake Town is not that far. And the people, I mean, like, oh my gosh, the logic of this just fails at every level.
When we were little, my brother and I used to set up army men on opposite ends of the room, and then take turns shooting marbles at the other guy's army. I feel like that's exactly what Peter Jackson is doing here, only with CGI, and with a great deal more wasted money involved.
Well, you know, siege engines like catapults are a thing.
My children! Where are my children?
Good fathers are always asking this question. Is this a Roland Emmerich movie?
How is this a sin that Bard is worried about his kids and looking for them? I mean, like, what?
Secret! Get down!
Get down? How about get out of the way? Do you know for a fact that this cart's going to leapfrog your kids?
Leapfrog the kids? If you actually watch the scene where he goes over them, it kind of lands right where they are. They get down because the wagon is actually high enough to not hit them as it goes over. The real criticism here would be he has no way of controlling which direction the wagon goes, and therefore might run slap over them with the wheel.
Are we winning? Forget it, I don't care.
Are we winning? I don't care. That's not even close to a criticism, and I don't understand. Like, I'm trying to even find out what it would mean if I read something into it, and I'm coming up blank.
Also, that's all the dwarves needed was their king. The massive outnumbering by the orcs had nothing to do with their asses getting kicked before.
First of all, this is like another one of those things that's a trope for a reason, right? You get inspiration for something and your morale goes up. And in fact, historically, the reason this is a legitimate trope is because in medieval and ancient battles where you have 2 sides going at each other with spears, swords, whatever, what decides the battle is usually not numbers, it's morale. Very few battles actually ended with huge portions of the respective armies dying. It usually was on the order of like maybe 10 to 20%. Decimate means to destroy 10% of something. That tells you how significant that would have been. To lose 10% of your army was a huge deal because usually it didn't happen. Battles were lost on morale. And the reason that, for example, Alexander could beat Darius was because he came out with a really great strategy to take out Darius himself, the king, and therefore crush the morale of the opposing army. So yes, it actually makes perfect sense that the dwarves, now that their king is on the field, have a surge in morale and therefore are able to fight harder and turn the tide.
This whole battle is so confusing. I don't even know why there are people still left to fight the orcs. Last we saw, the elves were getting their asses kicked, and Azog told us the dwarves were pretty much spent. Yet none of these armies look like they have any less numbers than before. How did this turn from a landslide orc victory with massive death on all opposing sides to, well, if we just believe in ourselves, we can beat these guys?
See previous point about morale. Also, the whole where did all these people come from thing is easily explained by the fact that these were the ones who were left behind as not being the most fit to fight.
If there's time to bro hug during the battle, it's really more of a skirmish of the 5 armies, isn't it?
Actually, again, because of the nature of the way armies clashing works in this way, you could find time to, bro hug, as they put it. Here it doesn't make as much sense because they're literally surrounded by people fighting and there's just randomly a clear spot, but even there, it's like the only way they're going to get attacked is if one of these guys finishes off his opponent and then realizes, oh wait, there's a couple of dwarves not paying attention, let me get them. But as long as they're maintaining whatever engagement they're in, they're not going to break off and try to kill Thorin and Dain, because then they would get hit from behind by whoever they were just fighting.
Suddenly, everyone has rams. Their fellow dwarves didn't bring them, and neither did the elves, so who had them?
Did you not see that Dain was riding one of those rams at the beginning of the whole thing? Like, yes, the fellow dwarves did bring the rams.
It's Thorin!
Despite the fact that no one can tell who is who, even when they're up close, old-ass Gandalf can figure out who these dwarves are from a distance while they ride magically appearing rams.
Okay, no, there's a difference between not being able to tell people apart and not remembering who's who. I can tell the dwarves apart. I can't always remember which one is which. That's the problem that they're actually having, but they're turning it into nobody can tell them apart. What do you mean? I can even tell two brothers apart, Feely and Keely. I can never remember which one is Feely and which one is Keely, but I know that there's a difference between the two. Gandalf is a wizard. Maybe he can just see really far.
Oh no, Thorn and the others might only just now be in danger.
Might only just now be in danger. What? Like they were going up there thinking there were a handful of orcs, and now we just found out that there's literally another army coming. Why? It's like they're not even paying attention to the movie they're critiquing. They're literally just, they take the whatever tiny segment they want to critique, ignore all context and everything else in the movie, and come up with a criticism that they think is going to fly. No, it doesn't fly, because like with the Rams, there's 2 or 3 other things I've already mentioned in this video where it's like if you actually pay attention to the context of the whole movie, it kind of makes sense, but no, we're just going to ignore all that exists for the sake of trying to score a cheap shot.
Goblin mercenaries. No more than 100. We'll take care of them. Go!
Because 100 goblin mercenaries are no match for 2 fucking dwarves.
Yeah, well, that actually does fit with the rest of the movies, because, like, did you see how they took out all those goblins in the Misty Mountains? 2 dwarves against all these guys seems kind of plausible in light of that. Now, granted, it's totally implausible realistically, but given that that's the weird movie universe we're in, why not?
Also, another thing I forgot about were those damn wereworms. Those were supposedly going to be a big deal, but they f***ing vanished from the movie as soon as they arrived. Guess they don't give a shit anymore. Plenty of Middle-earth to eat regardless of who's in charge.
What do you mean they were supposed to be a big deal? What Azog says about the wereworms is that they've forgotten about the wereworms. Okay, but like all that proves is they didn't expect people coming from the mountains because they didn't know they were going to have the worms to eat through to make a path for them. That doesn't mean the wereworms were going to be part of the battle. You read that into it.
Every fucking helpless person in this movie gets saved at the last second by someone who was previously nowhere near the place. It's not amusing anymore. If you come to expect this kind of thing every time, why is it even filmed like it's supposed to be a surprise?
Here I'll give CinemaSins just a little bit of credit, because I have made the argument before that Providence, or what they call extreme luck, actually plays a role in this story, as Gandalf will point out at the end. There are places where this happens, and it makes perfectly good sense. However, it does not make sense for Providence to be stepping in literally every 10 minutes because somebody is about to get hacked. Also, you know, why didn't they point out the fact that Bilbo, who up to this point has been at least sort of competent with, you know, a sword, because he's picked up a few things over the course of his travels, is literally just staring over there while the orcs are getting ready to chop his head off and doing nothing. Like, he's up there knowing he's going to have to encounter enemies, and yet he's just like, See, why couldn't they sin that? That was actually a more legitimate sin, if anything, but no, we're going to talk about this other thing. Whatever.
Bilbo decides, F my sword and ring, I'll let rocks decide this. Thankfully, I'm the Nolan Ryan of Hobbits. God, Bilbo hasn't missed once. This may actually be the least believable thing about this movie, I think.
Okay, I know the books don't matter, but hobbits are actually really good at throwing rocks. Also, by the way, since we've all seen the movies for The Lord of the Rings, Merry and Pippin chucking rocks from Treebeard's head at Isengard.
What we saw was so fake that it can't even register as cool or an adrenaline rush. I don't think I could be more offended even if Peter Jackson rode into the theater on a horse and started beating us with that carrot he always eats in these movies.
Okay, mad props here for using the Mario jump sound for Legolas doing the most stupid thing that Legolas ever does in any of the 6 movies in which he has appeared. Well, technically 5. He wasn't in the first one, but you get my point. Legolas here is doing something that is completely impossible, and using the Mario jump sound is just perfect. Kudos, CinemaSins, you got one thing really right.
Here come the Eagles, still clearly worried about those men and their great bows of yew, which would have shot them down if they brought Gandalf and crew closer to the Lonely Mountain. Can't we just admit they only show up when the story calls for it, and let go of all those stupid reasons why they didn't fly them farther in the first movie? Let the hate flow through you!
Oh yeah, books don't matter, right? Here they go again. And it's really interesting that in the 3rd Hobbit movie, they do the same thing that they did in the 3rd Lord of the Rings movie, where they cite the Hobbit book for the explanation why the Eagles don't show up anywhere, except when we magically need them to show up. quite apart from their own inconsistency about whether the books matter, the Eagles' reason for not showing up to or traveling to places and dropping the dwarves off was people with bows are going to shoot at them. Now, why would they worry about people with bows shooting at them in the midst of a giant melee battle? They're already, like, who's going to shoot them? Who's going to shoot them?
I bet you thought after we gave the last thing 2 sins because of this, that we wouldn't sin this, but you're wrong. A live Azog is a sinful Azog.
Okay, now I have to give them this. Azog being alive and actually stabbing Thorin through the foot here is pretty bad. But the eagle thing? Like, what do you mean the eagles aren't helping Thorin? They've all moved on to attack the huge army of goblins. Why would they stick around to help Thorin when they wouldn't even be able to know that Azog was under the ice at this point, where he was? Or, I mean, like, that doesn't even make sense. Also, to make matters worse, they didn't send the really, really crazy part where Azog, apparently pushing up off of nothing, manages to crash through the ice and come back up and actually kill Thorin, because the foot stab sure wouldn't have killed Thorin. He had to actually come up and do something serious for that, and he did it by crashing up through the ice. What's he pushing off of? Like, how did he do that? They didn't send that part. No, because that would be too legitimate, I guess.
Go north. Find the Dunedain. There's a young ranger amongst them. You should meet him.
No. Look, I'm already giving lots of leeway here that Aragorn is at least 60 in The Lord of the Rings kicking all that ass. But this bullshit right here is an absolutely ludicrous way to connect the 2 movie trilogies. Hey, go find this kid and be his pal. He's gonna be great one day. I know this because I too saw the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Oh, wait.
Here again, I have to give CinemaSins credit, because the way this plays out doesn't really make any sense at all if you know the timeline, because the timeline would make Aragorn about 10 years old at this stage. Thranduil probably wouldn't even know who he is. Even using the movie timeline, which shaves off 17 years between Bilbo's farewell birthday party and when the events of the story really get kicked off, that would still only make Aragorn 27 at this point. And he finds out, and again, I know books don't matter, but you want to know this stuff anyway. Aragorn only finds out who he really is at the age of 20. So at most, using the movie timeline, he could have had 7 years to have become known to people as anything. So, yeah, Thranduil probably ain't gonna know who Aragorn is. I gotta give him this. Like, I get the fact that that's kind of a cool tie-in, but it really doesn't work, and anybody paying attention would know that it doesn't work. This is where CinemaSins ought to be spending their time, is pointing out things that seem like they're cool but are really dumb, or pointing out things that are just so dumb they're funny. If they did just that, CinemaSins would be really good material. But no, they have to make 20-minute long videos, and so they have to find a bajillion things to sin that aren't really sin-worthy.
Also, why bother to tell your elf son to go find a human boy? Out of all the places and people to suggest he should spend time, you don't even have to read the books to find this offensive in every way. Besides, in Fellowship, it's not until they get to the Council of Elrond that they even meet. Not one scene in that movie suggests they had a long history together. F me right in the beard.
Not one scene suggests they had a history? In the Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, which is what we're talking about, Legolas straight up says, "This is no mere ranger. This is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor." Like, he knows exactly who he is. Why would he know that if he just met him? That doesn't even make any sense. So yes, there actually is in the movie, not in the book, but in the movie, there is an implication that Legolas knows Aragorn from at least some distance back. So again, CinemaSins is not even paying attention to the movies they're critiquing.
Damn, I should have also told him about Frodo. F***. Well, I'm sure he'll meet him someday.
Now, let's get real here. Yeah, sinning the fact that Aragorn wouldn't have been old enough to be anybody at this point made sense. Frodo is much, 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 much younger. Like, at Bilbo's party, he's 33. And if you add in the extra 17 years, he's 50 when he really gets going on the quest. So at this point, he wouldn't have even been born for another at least 10 plus years. So, I mean, unless this is just a really strange oblique way of again sending the Aragorn thing, it doesn't work.
Look, I haven't been able to find anything confirming that this is Bryan Cranston, but wouldn't it be just like a f***ing movie to put him here for 5 seconds and then pretend he doesn't exist? You know what The Hobbit could have used? Some damn Bryan Cranston, that's what.
What? Bryan Cranston? Like, what? I guess this is just supposed to be merely a joke, but again, it's like, how do you follow when they're supposed to be just funny versus funny criticism versus serious criticism? They mix it all together with the same tone of voice and everything, and it's like, at some point, you got to stick with some method of letting us know what you're actually doing with any given sin.
You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by luck?
Well, 95% of them were, for sure.
Dude, Gandalf is literally giving you the inside scoop of this story, which is that it's not mere luck. And you're just going to be like, nah. Okay, but don't call that the movie being problematic. That's you willfully disbelieving what the movie is telling you. There's a difference.
Magic rings should not be used lightly, Bilbo.
I'm definitely not going to investigate this ring that you have for another 60 years, and only after I've almost touched it to see the Eye of Sauron. The fact that Sauron needs a ring to rule the world, and just happened to appear right after our adventure in Gollum's cave, does not make me suspicious in the slightest. Good day.
But why would it make him suspicious in the slightest? What reason would he have to believe that there was a magic ring in the Misty Mountains that could even be Sauron's ring? Like, you have to assume so much to make that criticism make sense, but I can assume just as many things that make it not make sense. I mean, you can't just make up things to make it not work. The real criticism here is that we're setting up the Lord of the Rings, which we've all already seen anyway, and pretending that Gandalf knows something that he really shouldn't have even known yet, just to be a tie-in, which actually kind of makes it all not work that well transitioning into the Lord of the Rings, because now we have to think that Gandalf has literally been sitting on this knowledge for decades doing nothing about it. Now, like, he could have known for a long time and not been worried, but would he have known from the very beginning and not even thought a second thing about it? That's even a bit of stretch for me.
Sin the 13-minute credits? Sin the 13-minute credits.
You know, the whole sin the 13 minutes credits thing, I get why they would kind of do that in the same way that I kind of get why they would send, say, the half the studios thing at the very beginning, which I didn't really cover. But let's be honest here. In The Return of the King and in this movie, the 13-minute credits gives us a lot of really nice art in the background. I actually kind of like it. So why is it a sin that we get to look at all this beautiful artwork? It's really not. It's pretty nice. I enjoy it. I think it's a great way to close the trilogy, just like they did with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, yeah. No, it's not a sin. And there you have it, folks. That is the last of the CinemaSins stuff on the Hobbit movies. They kind of did a little bit better in this one than The Desolation of Smaug because they didn't do as much totally inconsistent stuff, although they had their moments for sure, but they also had some just outright dumb criticisms that made no sense, or the ones where they clearly just ignored literally everything else in the cinema universe that these exist in so that they could make their point. So is it better? Is it worse? Call it a wash. They're both terrible. Like the badness of CinemaSins just gets more and more and more over time. If you go from the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers, Return of the King, Unexpected Journey, Desolation of Smaug, Battle of the Five Armies, the last two are clearly the worst. And I think maybe the only reason why Unexpected Journey came out as well as it did is because it was only a 4-minute video and they didn't cover near as much stuff, and therefore they didn't give themselves as much time to get really, 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 really dumb. At any rate, like I said, unless they go back in time and do the animated stuff, this is the last time I have to deal with these guys. And let me tell you, I like those animated movies, so if they do go back in time and critique those movies, I'll be all over it. That said, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. Please also follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore for some occasional Tolkien-related trivia questions. You can also find me on Rumble and Odyssey, which is a cool YouTube alternative, which I just recently found out about. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon for all notifications. And of course, you can support me over at Patreon. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie.